exactly is going on here in America? And I'm not, we do a show every night, so I'm paid to think about it, but there's so much happening that it's hard sometimes to get the overview when you're caught up in all the details and people are, texting you this outrage or this abomination, and you sort of don't have a chance to pause and kind of add them all up. I grew up in a world where I'm 51, so America in my youth was really simple ideologically. There was the Soviet Union, which was left, and then there were the normal people who were right. And one side was for centralized control and communism, and the other side was for market capitalism and freedom and Christianity and, all the good things. It was left versus right. And so it's with that framework that I kind of assess what's going on in the world. And I began to change my mind Memorial Day weekend, when everything started to fall apart. And this group of people, this group of people kind of like all of a sudden flooded in the streets and started breaking things. And so I called a bunch of friends of mine who were there covering this, and I said, who are these people? I mean, there was this well-publicized death of somebody in Minneapolis, and that was the pretext. But obviously there was something bigger going on here, and I called a bunch of friends who were covering this, and I said, okay, what exactly is going on? Why are they breaking things and setting things on fire and hurting people? And he's like, well, these are avowed Marxists, and they're taking on capitalism. And then allied with them is another group that hates law enforcement, and they're trying to end the rule of law. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like, radical, leftist, nihilist, whatever, but they have an agenda. They're against capitalism, and they're against law enforcement. Okay, I mean, I'm not, for that, but it kind of made sense. So I watched this thing unfold over the subsequent weeks, and I noticed something really weird. The people who were against capitalism were destroying the smallest businesses in the country. They were going after like pizza places and liquor stores and camera shops, assuming any of those still exist, and dry cleaners and car dealerships. And I was like, okay, I guess that's capitalism, but in 2020 we have bigger examples like Apple and Google, right? The richest people in the world are capitalists, purportedly. They're the tech monopolies. And not only are they not getting their windows broken, they're funding it. So I'm like, wait a second. How are the anti-capitalist people ignoring the actual capitalists? And then I look over at the other group and they're like, we're against law enforcement. I'm like, all right, well, you can make the case that like not all law enforcement is great. There's the biggest law enforcement agency in America. It's called the FBI. And I think you could make a solid case that, they do good, but they've also, done some things for which they should be deeply ashamed because they were abuses of power, including things that I saw personally. So if you're against law enforcement, I suppose you're going to be calling the FBI to account for its abuses of power. But no. Instead, they went after the beat cop, the guy who's paid $55,000 a year to trudge through the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country, arrest criminals, help old ladies, get cats out of trees, or whatever, like do the retail end of law enforcement. This is a guy who may not have a college degree, who's not making any money, who has precisely zero power in American society, and this guy is the villain, just like the random cop. Trust me, if you intersect with American law enforcement, you hope it's a random cop and not the FBI. I mean, he may take your beer, but he's not going to tap your phone or put you in prison for the rest of your life for a thought crime. But for some reason, the people who were against law enforcement completely ignored this. And I began to realize maybe what they're saying isn't what they actually mean. Maybe they're not telling the whole truth about their motives. Maybe the people who say they're against capitalism aren't. Maybe the people who say they're against law enforcement aren't. Maybe this is part of a larger trend where the big things are getting bigger, the powerful are getting more powerful, and everybody else is getting the shaft. Maybe what we're watching is a consolidation of power, and maybe the people who have it are using these forces as their kind of shock troops in order to get what they want. So if you're a huge corporation, you want less competition. Monopoly is what you want to be. And maybe they're paying for these vandals because they know in the end it'll make them more powerful. This occurred to me in like June because I'm slow. And then I see the numbers. I see the money numbers, which are always like some of the most revealing numbers, but they're the ones we never talk about because somehow that's like irrelevant. Because when everything is political and everything is ideological, you kind of miss the obvious points, which is if you want to know who's in favor of the way things are, look at who's getting richer. And you see the numbers, and you see that Jeff Bezos, who has been paying for this, has benefited wildly from it. You think, wait a second, maybe there's something else going on. So that's a long preamble to the following point. I used to see the world in terms purely left and right. And I was and will remain on the right. But I'm starting to think that's not exactly the way I need to understand what's happening in the world. Maybe it's a matter of the big versus the small, the powerful versus the powerless, the corporate versus the independent. And that's another way to put it. The good versus the bad. People who want to think for themselves versus the people who want to demand you think the way they tell you to think. Maybe that's what it's actually about. So then I reassessed a lot of the things that I think are the worst about American society, and I began to realize those things aren't necessarily left-wing values, they're corporate values. So if you're running a company, what do you want? Obedient workers. You want people whose first loyalty is to you, who show up on Monday morning, who work through the weekend, who give you their all, who give you their lives. And in return, you give them a paycheck, but you give them no loyalty and no promise of long-term commitment. It's a continuous one-night stand. You're just hooking up. You're being used. That's true. Contrast that with the relationship you have with the people you love, your best friends, your family, the people with whom you have like sincere, intimate, personal relationships. They're there for you no matter what. And when you get the diagnosis or you get laid off from your job or when things turn bad, when you have to wear a mask as you ride your bike or the world falls apart, those are the people who are there for you. Those are the people. You're freaking me out, dude. This man's whispering sweet nothings to me from the front row. Those are the people who care about you, who actually care about you. They're not the ones who are telling you, oh, we really care about you because of the way you look and we're on your side. These are the people who are actually on your side, who are going to loan you money or let you sleep on the couch or talk you through a tragedy in your own life. Those are the relationships that matter. They're the only relationships that matter, and they're almost never the relationship you have with your employer if you work for a huge company. I'm sorry, it's just true. So what you're seeing, and you see it up and down American society, is the triumph of the values of those people over the values that we hold and that made this country great. And if you're wondering why American families are falling apart, and if you're wondering why every directive you hear from Washington divides you from your family, that's why. Because they want your first loyalty to be to them.
Hey everybody, this is Charlie Kirk, founder and CEO of Turning Point USA. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Turning Point USA.